die vrese waarmee ons moet lewe, vir guns en vir moord en vir rape. Ek smoeg vir die bad news, vir Zuma en sy views, van ons op TV moet kyk. Ek wil nie meer hoor hoe ons tieners begrawe, oor niemand hul steur aan die wet. Ek wil nie meer lees van affirmative action op 'n klei om te hou wat ek het. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Ek siek vir Malema, sy leuns en sy sê maar, ons hou maar ons mond en betaal. Ons kruip weg in kampe, word blind vir die rampe, en bid dat die Heer ons omhaal. Daar's Winnie Mandela, wat mense verbrand het, maar nou wil sy huil in haar hand. Die staatskas is leeg en die ANC jeug saai verwoesting en pyn deur ons land. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Het betaal vir die grond, waar sy kinders se kinders kan bly. Maar sy huis en sy lande is nou in die hande van die vyand teen wie hy moes stry. Ons kinders verstaan nie, waar kom al vandaan nie, hul erfenis is uitgewis. Geen volkslied of vlag nie, en geen erewag nie, vir die helde wat daar nie meer is. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. En ons reg om hier te kan bly.
Ja.
Welcome to American White History Month, South Africa series. This is your host, Karen Smith. We have talked a lot about the problems in South Africa, the murders, all the other things that are going on there. But one of the things we have not yet touched on is the future of the youth of South Africa.
She is currently talking.
There are a lot of young people today
must I put down?
1994, and they are known as the Born Frees. They have never known anything except ANC rule. They are not being taught their history. They are losing their language. Their monuments are being taken down. What is to become of these Afrikaners who are being disinvested of their heritage, their culture, their language, and their lives? So today, our guest is Dean Dart of Front Nasionaal Youth, who will talk to us about the perspective of the youth of South Africa, those very same disenfranchised Afrikaner children, and what he thinks their future will be. Welcome, Dean.
Hi. It's wonderful to be
Dean.
on the show.
It is great to have you because this is a story that needs to be told in a perspective that we haven't looked at yet. So if you would start by telling me, please, who is Front Nasionaal and what is Front Nasionaal Youth and what is their future and what are they trying to achieve?
All right. I think it's very important to first understand that Front Nasionaal is a South African secessionist party. We represent all European peoples in South Africa who constitute a minority in South Africa. It must also be very well understood that in South Africa we are a grand minority in the sense that there are just under 5 million people of European descent within South Africa, and at the moment there are more than 45 million who are of non-European descent in South Africa. If we can draw this in the odds, this here would be similar to that of what the Texans faced at the Alamo, or very similar to what General Custer faced in his final battle.
Wow, that is an incredible similarity for you to draw. I'd never thought about it that way.
Yes, it's very important to understand that the odds we are facing are very, very unfortunate in a sense. It's a great fear for me and for us at Front Nasionaal that the world will learn from what is currently happening in South Africa, to understand what happens when you become a disenfranchised minority within a country which you have a deep and grand history of both struggle and construction, of both anguish and utter hurt and sorrow.
I feel the pain of the white South African minority, but I don't have connections with the youth, Dean, so you're going to have to tell us about that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think it's very important to understand that currently Front Nasionaal is the only answer for the youth in South Africa, or at least the white minority in South Africa. Front Nasionaal indeed is the only option, considering the fact that they are the ones who hold their future best at heart, because we must understand that considering the fact that Europeans in Europe themselves only constitute 9% of the world's population, 9%, that's 9% of about 7 billion people. So when we look at what's happening to the rhinos within Africa, and how people wish to protect them as an endangered species, could we not say then the same, that out of 9 billion, 9% is then an endangered species? Is that not so?
Absolutely, Dean. I agree with you 100%.
But it is very important to understand that those in what is sometimes called the old outlying European colonies, of which South Africa was the so-called last domino of colonial Africa to have fallen. We must also understand that in America they also have the idea of that they, without paying taxes without political representation is not a very good system, because it in no way fairly is able then to show what is the grand constituency of the country who actually do the most work, because by definition income tax is so it is important to understand that South Africa, because of the idea of a majority government that rules, the votes of the minority matter absolutely nothing, and it is essentially, as Plato said, that in the end all democracy leads to dictatorship, and that is currently what we are facing in South Africa, where this disenfranchised minority is de facto living under the dictatorship of people who are non-Europeans.
Absolutely, and you have no voice whatsoever, as I see it.
Well, it must be very well understood that the voice which we do have is that of a church mouse in a church. No one hears him. As much as he is there, no one hears him. And it's very important also then to understand that within South Africa, even though there are very small parties, very much fractured parties, very much fractured what they call burgerlike organisaties, which is civil society organizations which do try to represent the minority in South Africa, often falter because they have no political clout.
None whatsoever, because the minority of the whites is so small that you do not have the ability or the number of votes to vote anybody into a position of power.
Yes, exactly, and because of the inability to vote anyone who really can actually change anything within a democracy, because remember, within a democracy, it is the people with the most votes that are able to change things. And it is rather unfortunate that in South Africa we can never, ever, not within a democratic system, be able to change anything in the country. And that is why Front Nasionaal is a party that seeks secession from the Union, which is currently South Africa. And it is very important also to understand that how Front Nasionaal Youth fits in all of this. Front Nasionaal Youth is an organization which fully backs our father party of Front Nasionaal, and the youth in South Africa have absolutely no future, not within the Union of South Africa. A person must understand that the moment a white child is born in a hospital, a beautiful white child with blue eyes and blonde hair, if you will, he has whatsoever. So the question then is it why? Why does this have such tragedy and such ignorance in the world? I find it very unfair.
Dean, we're losing you quite badly. Would you like to log out and log in again and see if we can get a clearer voice?
All right. Okay, just hold on.
People, this is an ongoing problem when we deal with calls from South Africa. They have load shedding, which means they have no power. So often they have severe problems to get on a show in South Africa, and also they are very brave to be willing to speak out. So we have to cut them a fair amount of slack and just continue, because their voice needs to be heard, and we need to be the ones to give them a platform. So I apologize for the dropping out of the show every now and then, but it is a occupational hazard when you have South Africans on. And it's no use me telling you the story of South Africa. These people are boots on the ground. They are right there dealing with the everyday fears, worries. Their voices are the ones that need to be heard way more than mine. Dean, are you back?
Hi, yes, I'm back.
That's better. Yes, good. Sorry, I hope you kept your train of thought there.
Yes, I have been able to.
Okay, good. Go right ahead.
All right, sorry, just want to see, I have a bit of, just hold on. All right, there, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
All right, no, wonderful. I believe the first topic which I'd really like to touch on, if that's all right, is considering that the largest thing that influences the youth in South Africa is education.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Now, a person must understand and look at education as a very subjective thing within South Africa, and it is a very subjective thing which influences the youth in South Africa. A person must look at a number of things, such as cultural disenfranchisement, which is currently taking place in South Africa. A person must look at historical distortion, which in no way is being rectified by anyone. All we have is an absolute leftist and exceptionally biased view of history, or at least of South African history, and people are being culturally enfranchised within schools from not only their language but also their roots, essentially, where tradition is taken away from schools, where we have, especially old schools, where these traditions have been removed completely, and it's very unfortunate because that means that the history which these schools are based on is a history which does not coincide with the status quo, and there are a number of reasons for this, in actual fact. When we look at education within South Africa, we must look at the whole question of language in South Africa. When a person looks at the minority of people of European descent in South Africa, you'll see the majority of them are the people called Afrikaner. And I believe that in the series thus far, I believe you've dealt rather extensively with the topic. Is that right?
Yes, we have, absolutely. But we haven't looked at the impact of the education system on the upcoming leaders of the country.
Yes, it is very important to look at this in a very holistic view. By that I mean, when a person looks at, we recently had the Wits University, which was an exceptional liberal university during the years of apartheid, and there were many protests against apartheid at Wits University. And now recently we've had the SLC president from Wits University saying how he very much adores Adolf Hitler and how he very much adores Robert Mugabe. And the question is, why on earth would someone in a responsible leadership position make such statements? Why? And his reasons were very clear. It's because both Robert Mugabe and Hitler were able to get rid of a minority. And my question to you is then, who are the minority in South Africa?
Well, there's no question about that. We know who they are, and we know that they're trying to be gotten rid of. But the means by which they are getting rid of them is barbaric, because a genocide is not simply murder and wiping out people. It is the destruction of their heritage, their language, their communities, and that is exactly what is happening to the people in South Africa. But how do the children navigate their way through this?
Yes, as I mentioned, the whole idea of language is very important and it's very much part of South Africa's history. I'd like to actually quote someone. His name was C.P. Huguenot. He had said that English, everything is English. Everywhere that you see and hear is English. In our schools, in our church, our mother language is being murdered. Our folk is being... I'm sorry, I'm actually trying to translate this. Yes. Our peoples are being murdered, and people are not respecting their history anymore. And in some ways, I believe that sums up very much what is happening in South Africa, because South Africa is one of the few countries in the world that have had something which is called a language struggle, and actually have had things that are called taalbewegings, which is language movements. And these movements were essentially to create, and not only that, but foster the development of the language that then became known as Afrikaans. Now, people who identify themselves as Afrikaans-speaking people constitute about between 3 and 3.8 million of the under 5 million people of European descent in South Africa. So it's a fairly large majority of people who currently identify themselves as Afrikaner-speaking people. And hence, for this reason, it is very important to understand the history behind the development of the language, and to understand how that there influences the nationalism that had taken place in the history of Southern Africa. Yes,
because it is a language which is not heard or spoken really anywhere else in the world. It is an identifying mark of white South Africans as Afrikaans.
Yes, that is very much correct. And it's also very important to note that on the 8th of May this year, we had celebrated the 90th birthday of Afrikaans, which is only one of 4 languages which were received what is it called? Sorry, I have the Afrikaans word, but I'm just trying to translate it into English.
I'll translate for you.
How should I say? It's the only language, one of 4 languages that were actually officially recognized as a state language in the 20th century, and thereby I believe it's fairly important that it actually has made its own mark in history, considering it's only one of 4. And
yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, and also a person must see and understand that because of that, there's a lot of pride attached to that, because of the history of from whence it comes. But also, I believe it's very important to look back and understand from whence this language actually came, to actually look back and understand its roots in history. As one Afrikaner intellectual had said, his name was Wyk Louw, that Afrikaans was the bridge between West Europe and Africa. And I believe this is very true, but it's rather unfortunate that Western Europe has burnt down this bridge, and now there's no way that it can exist as a European bridge anymore. And that I find is very, very unfortunate, but I believe that it will change in the near future if people wanted to.
Yeah, it's the will. It's the will to change things that seems to be lacking.
Yes, very much so. There's a lot of indifference. People are very indifferent as to what is really happening in South Africa. People feel, because largely in part because people feel as disenfranchised as they do, and I believe that the person must also look at birth rates within South Africa, and a person should look at the mean age of the people of European descent in South Africa. The mean age in South Africa is very much nearing on the age of 50 now. So that means we have a very old minority in South Africa.
Who are tired of the fight, because they have fought this battle throughout the apartheid years and throughout this new post-apartheid era. They have fought endlessly, and they're tired. And
very much
so.
Yes, and that is why when I often do speak to people, they often say, it's all right. It's the youth's problem, and I find that very, 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 very bad. That they say that the problems which were created by people who have absolutely nothing to do with it have to solve it, and in some way, I believe that is just passing the buck, and I don't believe that is in any way fair, and I believe that is in its own way. Treacherous to the people that have to essentially live on, and those there are the youths of South Africa.
And those are the very people that we should be supporting with every ounce of our courage and willpower. We should be supporting them because theirs is the future. And if you want a good future, the same as we had when we were young, then we need to be fighting for that.
But there's a very big problem which exists in all European countries, is that there's not what's called gemeenskaps, which means it's community. People do no longer have community, and because people no longer have community, they have no sense of caring about others besides their nearest, which is their own family. And that also creates a very big problem, because then you have no feeling of having to care for someone else because there's no relation. The relation which existed within the community it no longer exists, and that is why when you do speak to people who have children, then they say, well, as long as my children and my family are fine, everything is all right. And that is a very unfortunate and very suicidal idea for the future of South Africa, because when a person looks at at Statistics South Africa, at the moment, the people that are the age of 18 and under constitute 15 million of the just over 50 million South Africans. So 15 million people are 18 and the age and under 18. But when a person looks at the amount of children of European descent that constitute this 15 million, you'll see it makes up less than 9%. So what we are now doing is that we are throwing this less than 9% to the wolves. How could we do that to ourselves?
Can I just ask a question here? Do you not think that this loss of community happens because essentially whites in South Africa are prisoners in their own homes? So where you took it for granted that you knew your neighbors, you talked to them over the fence, you knew who everyone in your street was, you knew their kids, your kids all played together. Now it's unsafe for a white family to live like that. So you live in a fortress and you don't know your neighbors, because I lived in the same house in South Africa for 10 years, I didn't know the neighbors on either side because you live in fear. So do you not think that the fortress mentality and the way that the whites are forced to live has added to the loss of community feeling?
You actually do bring up a very valid point in the sense that people have become indifferent because they choose not to experience what is truly happening in South Africa. And by that I mean people have decided to dance around the problem. They've decided to what is called escapism, where it is better for me to just pour a glass of brandy and Coke and put some meat on the fire, have a braai, which is a barbecue, and everything will be all right because I just live in my little insulated world and I have nothing to do with anything outside of that. And to a large extent, this is again due to indifference. It's due to the fact that people are indifferent to people who they at one stage considered brothers, who they at one stage had very grand communal relations with, and that is very sad.
I have seen that, and I've seen the battles between the many groups supposedly fighting for the Afrikaner. I watched from the sidelines the battles between them and how people will sit in their house and have their braai or sit behind their keyboard and be a keyboard warrior. But when it comes to time to stand up and take that battle to the streets, they're not prepared to do it.
No. You know that when I have gone campaigning for Front Nasionaal, it has often been that especially the people who are a bit older, usually around about the age of 40, they often say, "Nee, ek hang my hoed op en los dit alles in die Here se hande." That means that they hang their hats and they just leave everything in God's hands. But is it then also not so? Because the person must remember the Afrikaner is a very religious nation, and it is, and that their faith is very much intertwined with their history. And for this reason, they have, and I feel this is very true, have forgotten that just as much so as God would provide for them, just as much so they are the hands which God has put on this earth to do something. And that, I believe, is a very important point which we have forgotten.
Point that is very, very close to my heart, because God never said, sit on your backside and do nothing. I will do it for you. You need to do. He will be there and he will carry you through it and will help you through it. But he never said he would take the obstacles out of your way.
Yes. But if I can also perhaps get back to a person must also remember that praying, being able to read your Bible at school, all of that has actually been removed from our schools as well. That is a very important point. A person must remember that because the faith has had a very deep impact in South Africa and is also very much a part of our culture, and that itself has also been forcibly removed by the government in South Africa, which is the African National Congress,
who are basically communistically and socialistically inclined, are they not?
A person must also take a look at Bladen Nzimande, which is the Minister for Higher Education. He is actually a very senior figurehead in the South African Communist Party. So when a person looks at this complete cultural disenfranchisement and this debasement of all European idealism and Western civilization within our schools and our universities, it should come as no surprise that it is being removed, because the head of the education, with the higher education department, which is our tertiary institutions, our universities and colleges and technical colleges, is a communist through and through.
Yes, and I find that throughout the world, the same thing is happening. They are either removing Christianity from the schools and from the country as a whole and labeling Christians as the enemy. So once they take that firm faith away from you, they're taking hope at the same time. And hope is the thing that keeps everybody going.
That is very true. There's a debasement of the foundation upon which a nation has been formed. And when foundations of a house are cracked, anything that is built on top of that is compromised. Anything that is built on top of that will not stand. And a person can draw this comparison through everything in a youth's life. If his education is built on a broken foundation, which is currently what is happening, when his culture is based on that of disenfranchisement and alienation, then everything that is built on top of that, the identity of this young person that is being formed, is essentially a olive tree growing in the wind that has grown skew because of the wind. And there's nothing to uphold it anymore.
So what hope is there then for the youth? What needs to be done to give them a sense of identity? Because that is being taken away from them. What do the present day youth identify with? And is this part of the problem for the black youth as well, that they are no longer tribal and no longer have an identity? So is that why they are raging in the streets and the white youth do not have a sense of identity at all? What does one do about that?
Well, you talk about raging, and I believe it's very important to draw comparisons to what is currently happening in America, that happened in Baltimore and Ferguson, and that there's an everyday happening in South Africa. Every single day this happens, and a person will also see that this happens at universities, where students who get bursaries choose not to either attend classes, and when they are asked then to repay these bursaries, because they have not attended classes as the condition to receive the bursaries, they threaten to burn down these institutions. And then what happens is that the government buckles, the institutions buckle under the pressure of students who choose not to add any value to these institutions. A person must also understand that when a person looks at the racial quotas, we have a quota system, not only in our sports, which is something which I'd love to get to, but also within our universities, within our workplaces. The future of youths of European descent in South Africa is exceptionally bleak. But the question is that what will they do? And the question is rather simple. They first have to get mad. Getting mad is the first step. You can only solve the problem when you see it. And currently, most youths have fallen for the humanistic, utopianist ideas. But when they are confronted with a harsh reality of what it means to have a majority who unfortunately have not had good education, who unfortunately do not have the same moral values, the same virtues, have grown up under a very different culture, they will see that it is incompatible, it is irreconcilable. But up until that point, it's only then that they can actually do something about it. And it's unfortunate that many youths have not reached that point. Many youths can't see further than their nose. Many youths cannot see that the future which I am now facing is exceptionally bleak, and I have to do something about it now.
Why, Dean? Why do they not see it?
I once heard a saying that the young man who is a socialist has heart. The old man who is a socialist has no head. And I believe that is an unfortunate case in South Africa, where we still have youths that do believe in this utopianist idea, greatly because it is forced down their throats, because we have this historical distortion that is forced down their throats, where they themselves are the enemy, where they have a self-hatred towards themselves, and not only towards themselves, but to the community, and that causes a disenfranchisement within the community, where all I do is stay with my group, whoever you self-identify with. And in the end, we can in no way then identify with that group, because they do not share the same foundations that we do.
So is that leading to the white privilege, white guilt thing? Is that what is being forced upon the youth? And because you young people tend to be idealistic, they accept that, and they accept that they should have guilt.
There's a misunderstanding that, when you read Das Kapital or you read the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx, goodness gracious, it is opium. And I believe that because, as you say, yes, young people are very idealistic, but not only that, but they're also very influenced. And it is also upon this, it's also upon that idea that they can be very influenced, partly because of the stereotype which a lot of youths have internalized, and partly because there is some truth in it. Many youths actually do fall for these utopianist ideas, and I can't blame them for wanting to, because, I mean, what else is more amazing than a free and fair society? But it is irreconcilable.
The reality doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly. It looks beautiful on paper, as do so many things look beautiful on paper, but in practice it is unworkable.
So how do you and Front Nasionaal youth hope to turn this around?
Well, first of all, it is very important to first bring what is called kundigheid. Kundigheid means to, if I can put it in a verb, that means to bring knowledge, to help people not be ignorant. That there's a fair way of putting it, because ignorance is bliss, and when you don't know what is happening, one of the greatest saying which I've ever heard is, those who do not know that they do not know that they do not know. And that is very true of the majority of youth in South Africa.
But, Dean, my question is, how do they not know? Do they not see what we see happening in South Africa every day? Are they blind to it?
Well, the truth is very difficult to accept. And I believe that there is a grand basis upon which a lot of this is based. A lot of the, because look, a person. Let's also remember that this is guilt. The moment a child is born in South Africa, he has the perpetual guilt of every colonizer which had entered Africa, because they are the last remembrance of that colonialization within South Africa, and they bear the guilt. And this guilt is forced upon them from the moment they are born.
But the guilt for what, Dean? The Afrikaner turned an empty bush into a thriving, absolutely first world country. So for what do they bear the guilt?
Like I had said, young people are very impressionable. They are highly influenced. And when you do look at the education system in South Africa, which has been set up in such a way that it does promote these very distorted, very biased historical ideas, and it promotes this socialistic idea that that there is a minority in South Africa which is to blame for all of the ineptness which is currently being experienced by South Africa, even if it is 20 years down the line. I had recently spoken to a couple of teachers prior to this interview to get a feeling about what was going on within our schools today, and what I heard was rather shocking. You see, what happens is, and I don't have a problem with a person should not really have a, as Voltaire said, about freedom of speech, and I believe in freedom of speech, I do, and so do we at Front Nasionaal. Freedom of speech is very important, and you can say whatever you like, but that does not mean that I will agree with you, but I will forever defend your right to say it. But in South Africa, that is not true. In South Africa, that is not true. And I believe this is also mirrored in most of the Western world. Whereas if you say something which is not to the status quo, you can say whatever you like, as long as it agrees with the status quo. The moment you say something against it, then you are, as they say in South Africa, counter-revolutionary.
Yes.
And it is also very important to understand that these so-called cultural, counter-revolutionary tendencies, as they like to say in South Africa, exist don't exist, which is a bit of a problem, because now the youth in school learn this very biased and very historically distorted version of history within South Africa, which then creates a foundation built on historical distortion. And from that point on, they live in utter ignorance of the truth. And in some ways, this is not only the education systems to blame. In some way, it is also so that it is not only community wherein they live to blame, but as well as parents who do not teach their children their history, their roots, their background.
Why would that be happening? Does that have a link to the number of whites who have been signed out of the job market by the laws, and they are too busy surviving to worry about that? Does that have a bearing on it?
Well, yes, this goes back. We must remember that most families of European descent in South Africa are basically in survival mode.
Yes.
Thereby, yes, they are in survival mode, and thereby, because now if you look at the survival instinct, you don't tend to take care of people who you have no relation to, and so people have created these very insular societies, in the sense that as long as my family and my children are safe, all is well. And to personally remember that the moment people are honest and are objective about South Africa's history, that would then term them as racist. They would term them as bigoted. They would term them as right-wingers in South Africa. And all of these names bear grand stigma, and youth do not want to be branded in. This would then further disenfranchise them from the job market. This would further disenfranchise them from the general liberal community that exists in the Union of South Africa. And so then they choose not to, because of this heavy burden which is then which accompanies the truth within South Africa.
So it is easier to just go with the flow.
Yes, it is far easier to go with the flow and to only, as I often say, youths live in such a way that they only stare at their feet. They only see what is happening now. And as they get older, they start looking up. And then they start seeing what will happen in the future. And at the moment, all of the youths are staring at their feet. And so they can't see what will happen in the future. In South Africa, and this is rather unfortunately been proven via trends that are happening in South Africa, when a person looks at both birth rates, when a person looks at immigration out of South Africa, and a person looks at death rates of the people of European descent in South Africa, you will see that by the year 2156, that there is basically my grandchildren's children will be the last whites in Africa.
If they survive that long.
Yes, that is a different question on its own. But
yeah,
as I say, those... Yes, but as I say, those are current trends. And the question is, what are we doing about it? How we tend to only see 5 to 5 years. Who will I vote for next? Who will I vote for next year? Who will I vote for in 5 years? That is how we tend to see things. Instead of having to look, how will things look 25 years from now? How will things look 50 years from now? How will things look 100 years from now? And what am I doing now to create the society that I want my grandchildren to grow in? That's the questions that must be asked, and those are difficult questions, and the answers to those questions are very difficult, and people are scared to ask those questions because that means that they can no longer live in the denial which they choose to live in.
I could absolutely say hallelujah. Dean, you are saying things that are so brave to say because we think them, but we are scared to say them. That was so well said.
Because
when a person don't want to look at it, because then we have to look at ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And the one thing about man, which is very true, is that we are so scared of ourselves because we are so unknown to ourselves, and all man is scared of the unknown.
Yes, but in this situation that the Afrikaner is in South Africa at the moment, they
Yes.
need to be doing some very close introspection and thinking of the things that you have just spoken about and changing things now because it is almost too late.
It is of what is, as some people state, a biological imperative that we do that. And I believe that because that there is the idea behind humanism and utopianism, is that there is no difference that exists among humanity. But then I ask you, is a Yorkshire dog the same as a Great Dane, I ask?
Yes, yes. Yes, utopia would be all sitting around the fire holding hands and singing Kumbaya. But the history of the world teaches you that is neither possible nor has it ever happened. So,
if I can interject, I believe to show the fallacy in this socialistic, humanistic, utopianist idea which exists in South Africa, which was drawn up in the so-called Freedom Charter, which was done in the 1950s in Kliptown. I believe it was 1951 to be more precise. In that charter, that states that all men are equal, all men are the same. There is no difference that exists among us. But let me ask you: how many Europeans have you seen that are xenophobic in South Africa?
You don't, and this is another thing. It was said by Sunette Bridges, I think, or it may have been Daniel Lotter from Front Nasionaal. I speak under correction here. But when the statues were being defaced, one of those two people said that, yes, the Boer did not exactly have a love for Cecil John Rhodes at all. They had no reason to love the man. But while the NP was in charge, they did not tear down those statues. They did not riot in the streets. They did not burn down the university that he founded, because it is a historical fact that although he may not have been a friend of the Afrikaners, he is a very large part of the history of South Africa. So how can they then come and say that there is no difference between the people?
Yes, no, it is very, very much true. I don't understand how they can say that all people are the same. When you drive from, let's say, when you drive in one town and you cross a bridge to the other side of town, you see the difference. And when you do walk, say, within what we call townships in South Africa, which are squatter camps, essentially, when you walk there, and you think about the humanist ideal that says we are all the same, there's no difference that exists among people. I ask people then, can you then, as a person of European descent then, be able to see yourself as the same as those people? Do you share common ground? That's the question that should be asked. Do you share common ground within the way that people live? Do you share common ground within culture? Do you share common ground within intellect? Do you share common ground within the way their view of life? Do you share the common ground? And if the answer is no, then how can it be said that we are then all the same?
Absolutely, and that is the most frightening thing for me about South Africa, is that the whites and the blacks try as they might. And the whites have tried because they voted overwhelmingly for change from the apartheid system. But try as they might, there is no common ground because we do not worship our ancestors. We do not sell our children for body parts. We do not live just for the moment. So there has to be an obvious difference in beliefs, in cultures, in everything.
That is exceptionally true. I could really not agree more. And so is it the same that our histories differ. So the question then is it the history with which I identify the most? Why am I not allowed to learn that history? Why is it wrong for me then, as a European youth that was born in South Africa, then to learn the history of my forefathers? Why is it wrong then to learn the history of the people that laid the cornerstones of the foundations of the democracy that exists in South Africa? Why is that wrong?
Because the black population is enjoying all the results of that. They like the clothes, they like the designer watches, they like the imported vehicles, they like the big houses, they like all of those things. But they do not like the people who made that possible.
And I believe they like even less so to actually work for it. Because when a person looks at the idea behind socialism, the idea behind socialism is essentially you get all that you need to survive for free.
Yes, but that is a failed policy throughout the world. Wherever it has been attempted, it has failed. And
it is in light of these failures that it is important that we then have our own government, our own institutions, our own education system, and our own country, because of these irreconcilable differences that exist, and because there is a system which is being propagated upon the people of European descent in South Africa that is irreworkable. It will not work, and it is clear that in the past 20 years it has not worked. Because a person must also look at this economically, and by economically I don't mean comparing South Africa to what it was and to what it is now. I mean you compare South Africa then to the rest of Africa, and you will see the industrial giant that existed and was handed over in the 90s is now the slowest growing economy in Africa.
Absolutely. Nigeria has overtaken South Africa.
Yes, and the question is it then again, is this what we are creating for our children? A society of stagnation, a society wherein they cannot truly exist. Is that the society we are choosing to have for our children? That's the questions that must be asked. I'd like, if you don't mind, I'd like to just also talk a bit about a few other things with regards to transformation for youths and black economic empowerment in South Africa, and how that actually has a very grand influence on them. In South Africa, because of the high unemployment rates, the government has tried to stimulate entrepreneurship and actually get people to start their own businesses. And so, but there's rather unfortunate problems with this, in the sense that to also then try and alleviate the poverty that exists within white Europeans in South Africa, they start businesses which do end up being successful. A vast majority of them become exceptionally successful, and there are many, many, many examples of these businesses being successful in the post-apartheid era. And a lot of people then would ascribe this to so-called, a lot of non-whites in South Africa would ascribe this to the so-called neoliberal policies which were taken on by the South African government as they had moved away from their absolute Marxist policies. Although I disagree with this in a grand sense, because when a person looks at the sheer history of where the people come from that live in South Africa, we look at the first multinational company, which was created by the Dutch, and the majority of people are from a Dutch stock in South Africa. So thereby, can we then truly say it is because of neoliberal policies? No, it is not. It's because of a sheer business brain that has always existed in South Africa and still exists today. But the problem with it is at the moment that these businesses do start growing, then we have transformation and black economic empowerment that comes in. And the problem with that is that, first of all, the government incentivizes these businesses then to employ non-whites. Number one, there are a number of tax incentives which do incentivize these businesses then to not take on white youths which have just graduated either from university or have just finished school and have rather strong attitudes. And what then happens is that then it must also be taken into account that within state institutions, now the state in South Africa, we have this, as they call, there's a large state capital company. South Africa has, or the new South Africa anyway, has inherited the large state-run institutions which were created within the apartheid era, and to transform these institutions, we have the 170 odd laws which have been created to disenfranchise people of European descent from these institutions. And so now, because these laws have been put in place to disenfranchise those that were there, now we have young people of European descent that cannot get jobs because all of these incentives have been put in place for businesses not to employ people of European descent. But not only that, but when these young people then choose to start their own business, they inevitably have to then employ non-whites, not because they would like to employ non-whites, but because they have no choice, because of these laws that have been put in place.
So essentially, you cannot choose the best trained person or the best person for the job.
No, unfortunately not. Goodness gracious.
The BE.
Yes, with regards to that, the moment a company fronts, which mean by fronting they mean that they say that they do employ the correct racial quota in South Africa, then the fines which are placed on these companies are astronomical. And so there's a very large de-incentivization to then employ Europeans because of these debts, or rather because of these fines that are incurred on companies. And I mean, these fines are rather heavy. And I know of a very good friend of mine who's part of an engineering company, and they could no longer front because they were very pro-European in their employment scheme, and not only that, but also very pro-skill. By that I mean that employ people with the correct skills, and for that they were fined over 600,000 rand at the end of the financial year because they were not meeting quota, and that is about $55,000, which was then fined for these companies.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was that heavy.
Yes, and so then you have to weigh your pros and cons. What do you do? Do you then employ more adequate people, or do you level the fines? It's really between a rock and a hard place, and that is where companies find themselves in South Africa. And so then they choose the latter. They rather choose the hard place, which is then employing people who are incompetent, people who do not have the correct qualifications, or who you'd be surprised lie about their qualifications and have nothing to back it. Whether it be even winging it is not possible in some cases.
But is that then not totally counterproductive? Because instead of one qualified person, you're going to have to employ more than one unqualified person to try and get the job done. So it is not good on the bottom.
Yes, very much. And I mean, when a person looks at the history of European South Africa, you'll see that the greatest strides made by the Europeans of South Africa was when they worked together. And because of these systems that have put in place, everyone has to strive to be the utmost best. And because of this, everyone is the enemy of everyone. No one can no longer work together because the competition is so stiff that they have to be the absolute best to try and get that one job. And so we have so this further breaks down that. I'm sorry, say again.
Even it does not cut it because you're the wrong color.
Well, that just shows you how hard they have to work. It just shows you what has to tick in the back of every matric student writing their papers. It is to show how little hope there is when all of these things are playing in the back of their minds. And then I ask you, is that the type of future we are trying to create for our children?
Yeah, one has to wonder. So then, what?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd also like to expand on the few other topics with regards to this, if that's all right.
Absolutely. This is your show, Dean. You teaching me.
All right. When a person looks at what happens within sport in South Africa, it's utterly dreadful. Utterly, utterly dreadful. When a person looks at how the quota system is employed in South Africa, you will see that when we take, for example, the Proteas that went and played at the Cricket World Cup earlier this year, and the New Zealander that hit the winning runs that knocked us out of the finals was an ex-South African who could not find a place in the new South Africa. He was a cricket player who could go nowhere in South Africa, so he left South Africa, went to New Zealand, and in the end knocked South Africa out of the World Cup. Now that is only one story that I can use to typify how horrible the racial quotas are in South Africa. And the worst part is that this is not just influencing our national teams. This is filtered down. This is filtered down into provincial teams. This is filtered down into even county teams, into all of the leagues. They have to perform via these race quotas. And what does that mean? That means you don't choose people based on their quality. You choose them based on their color of skin. And so again, what hope does that leave? What hope does that leave then for an aspiring sportsman? What hope does that leave for him to have a future to eventually maybe put on the green and gold?
So that takes away all need or will to be the best, because it's not going to do anything for you.
The mountain that they have to climb seems insurmountable.
Yeah, it does. That is frightening. That is really frightening. That no, are we based upon achievement?
Yes, it is in no way a meritocratical system. It's not. It's not a It's not a meritocracy. In no way.
No. So then you are essentially setting up your sports teams to lose. You're setting up everybody, and that is a microcosm of the country, is your sports team.
Yes.
You're setting them up to lose, and you're setting the entire country up to fail.
Yes, exactly. And the question is now, where's the international world now? Remember when the Springboks went to Australia? The whole world condemned that tour when they went to go play in Oceania.
Yes.
The whole world condemned it, but where's the world now when there is a policy which is enforced via race? Where are they now, I ask?
Well, that is a question we ask loudly and long together, Dean. Where are they, and why? Why are they not standing up and screaming out more loudly about this?
Where's the boycott of South African sports now?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that should be asked. And must remember, these race quotas are then pulled through to our tertiary institutions. When you look at what happens at universities, you'll see it is absolutely dreadful. In South Africa, we have a medical system which is failing, but I'm not going to talk about that now because that's a horror story all on its own, and I can almost say that would require a show on its own. But when a person looks at the state-run medical system in South Africa, there's a major shortage of doctors, which is rather prevalent in the sense that we have to send students to Cuba. Cuba? Yes, that communist country just south of America, to go study to become doctors. That is how bad the situation is in South Africa, just to give an idea. But a person must see that these racial quotas then pull straight through down to our tertiary institutions. And what happens there is that when you have aspiring students who are really very qualified to essentially take up subjects such as to study medicine, there's a quota system employed there as well, whereby only an X amount of students of European descent that can enter, regardless of whether they are better than people of other races, regardless of whether their marks are better, regardless of whether they have better aptitudes, because they are white, they cannot go.
So then the ones that are accepted and given these full bursaries then riot and burn the university down. So where are the educated people in South Africa coming from?
Well, the question is rather not where they are coming from, but where they are going to. When you do have these students that are not able then to find a place in our universities, when they are not able, when you have young professionals that are not able to find a place in the new South Africa, what do? They leave. Because where else must they go? Well, how else can they make a living? How else can they eventually have a family? But the real question is, it's not about those that leave, but those that are left behind, those that do not have the ability to leave, those that live in abstinent poverty, of which there are many.
I believe so. It's about 20% of the white population, as I understand it, but figures are really hard to come by.
Yes, because well, a person must also look at it that this is. Remember, you're quoting very conservative figures as to what exactly is poverty as well. That's the question that should be asked, and according to that definition, they base everything. A person, when a person looks at the middle class of South Africa, the middle class of South Africa, especially the black middle class, comprises more of South Africa's population than the entire population of people of European descent in South Africa. So the question then is that how can things not be getting better for them, and how can we say that it is not getting better, or rather, how can we say it is not getting worse for us, when the middle class within people of European descent in South Africa is shrinking? Because the middle class is essentially an international benchmark whereby they can say whether a country is growing or economically, or whether it is shrinking economically. And when a person looks at the figures that currently have been that come from the South African Institute of Race Relations, you will see that the bell chart is going in the wrong way for people of European descent in South Africa.
But that is a definite strategy by the ANC government to make sure that happens. I mean, there's no question about that, given the BEE laws we've been talking about this, that apply even to sport. So it's a strategy of the government. But the whole country is failing because of that. Although the black middle class might well be growing, it is
but to be fair, yes, but to be fair, we must also remember that the majority of this middle class has grown out of the state-run capital companies, referring to ISCO, which is the steel companies, or the whole state bureaucracy has been replaced, and they essentially then represent the middle class. So it's actually an entire falsity, in truth.
Dean, I absolutely love you. You had some other points that you wanted to touch on. Please go right ahead. We have 20 minutes left, and you have got a lot of fun to cover.
Yes, I see now. Also, as I had mentioned earlier, when a person looks at the language struggle in South Africa, and we also look at the struggles to break away from the British monarchy, which is also something which America also tried to do in the American Revolution. When we broke away and created the Republic, the amount of fervor that was put behind that was astronomical, and it was beautiful. And the amount of people who were publishing in Afrikaans grew exponentially, because suddenly there was a pride in a language. It was no longer a language which was just what is called a kitchen Dutch. It was no longer that. It was something on its own. And for this reason, that is why when in 1925, on the 8th of May, which was 90 years ago yesterday, it was created as an official language in South Africa, regardless of the fact that its roots actually lie far, far, far earlier. But when a person looks at the amount of works that were being published, be it from textbooks to stories, be it from stories to magazines, we see a beautiful growth of culture. But what is now happening in South Africa, because of a cultural disenfranchisement, and because of, as I had spoken about, earlier, we have an entire Anglicanization of schools. Because a person must look at it this way: as schools become more of an Anglophone, meaning as they become more English, it opens the doors for diversity. And what then happens is that the state, or at least the Department of Higher Education, is slowly but surely also creating Anglophones within institutions. And so that means that these institutions that were originally Afrikaans are now turning to English. And in the long term, this is very detrimental, because now you no longer have teachers that are being taught to teach Afrikaans, or being taught in Afrikaans, or being taught to give subjects in Afrikaans. They're being taught to give subjects in English. So what now happens is now you have a domino effect, whereby we have the Department of Basic Education, which can then no longer supply Afrikaans teachers. Then they tell the schools, well, guess what? We can only give English teachers. And then you have a multilingual school. And what happens then? Then, when you have a multilingual school, they have to diversify further, which means then taking students that do not identify with the cornerstone of which these institutions were created. And so in the long term, you have an evaporization of Afrikaans. We must look at this at the same that happened in Wales with Welsh, where Welsh constitutes only 9% of mother tongue speakers within Wales, even though it is now only a cultural icon now. And the question is, do we want Afrikaans then to also become a cultural icon like it is in Wales? Or is there more depth to it? Is there more history behind it? Does it mean more to us than just something as a cultural thing which we do at the Karoo Kunstefees?
Yeah. Yes, and that's another story altogether, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm very much so, I'm afraid.
Yes, every door you open, we could do a whole show on that.
Yeah, most likely. Yes, but in the end,
the loss of your language and the loss of your history is the worst thing that is happening, because once you've lost that, you lose your identity.
Yes, and that it is identity assassination, and that means that it is in itself a genocide. And the question is what are we doing now to stop this genocide, be it culturally or physically, be it historically or in any other form?
Tell me, what are we doing, and how can we, on the other side of the ocean, help you with that?
Well, first of all, and the most important thing which people overseas can do is to change the perception of the Europeans that live in South Africa. Change the perception which exists. Change the perception that we are these very backwards people, that we do not possess any modern ideas, and that we have, for some reason, not left the 20th century, when the contrary is true. We are still here and we still exist, which shows that we can adapt as we have in the past, always adapting. When Jan van Riebeeck had landed in South Africa just to create a refreshment station, it seems that he had found fertile land to plant the seeds for a new nation. It seems that when Jan van Riebeeck tried to create a refreshment station for the VOC, it seems that he had sowed the seeds for a new language. It seems that when Jan van Riebeeck decided to establish what is now Cape Town, he created a nation in South Africa. And
we look at the history, and they were an amazing nation.
Yes, and I think it is also very important to realize that at the same time as Jan van Riebeeck had landed in South Africa, so was Newfoundland found in America, in the Americas anyway.
Yes.
And it was founded. That's also a very important thing to realize, is as America was basically established to the state of what it is today, so at the same time, so was South Africa established. And in that sense, we share grand common ground, and both America and South Africa have fought imperial wars against the British imperialists. In that sense, we also share a very common history. Both South Africa and America also had segregation laws in an attempt to protect that which they held dear, which was their culture and their identity. And both of them now face total annihilation in the future. And the question is now, what are we both doing? That is where the idea of a neo-pan-Europeanism comes in, where the idea of European fundamentalism comes in, where the idea that humanism has failed, and the only people we can truly rely on are those who are our own, and those people who we view as our own. And that is why it's important then to change the idea that hating ourselves because of the history is correct. If you really want to see how, if you really want to have a very good idea about when we look at what happened at Baltimore and Ferguson, when we take a look at what happened in Liberia, Liberia was now a piece of land which was bought in Africa by the Union of America, where they could repatriate free slaves to Africa. And these free slaves now currently indulge in cannibalism, witchcraft, have absolutely no working government, have had some of the longest civil wars in the world. And I ask you then, do we consider ourselves then as the same as those people, or should we each live on our own and take our own paths? That's the question that should be asked.
There is a big movement throughout the world rising up at the moment, and it's throughout the entire world, of exactly that white people also have the right to exist, and they also have a value. But you're not allowed to say that, and you're not allowed to be proud of being white, because then automatically you are anti-something else.
Although, in a personal sense, I don't like the idea of saying because of the color I am proud of it. I am proud of being a European, because that there has far, far more depth than what it is to say I am proud to be white in a grand sense. That is but a personal opinion. But I find that because all of the people who have identified themselves or are from European stock have done great things. When we look at Isaac Newton, when we look at... Yes, and then... And for that reason... I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
No, and for that reason, because of the history which we have as European peoples, do we then not have a right to exist? Is it then not so that we have given to the world some of the greatest inventions that exist? When you look at the automobile, when we look at electricity, when you look at Edison, when you look at Tesla, when you look at, or even culturally, when you look at people like Wagner, Beethoven, Schubert, when you look at Rembrandt in art, have we not then given enough to the world than to say that we have proven ourselves, we have proven the right to exist? And if anything was true, you could look at Southern Africa and see that if there's one place in the world where they have chosen to exist, that is here. And by that I mean we have chosen the route wherein we can govern ourselves, where we can make our own choices. The question is that who will follow?
Who has the courage and the strength to do what the founding Afrikaners did, because they fought tooth and nail for the right to be there, to survive there, to create there. And they have an absolute right to be there because they created that place.
I think...
Where is that courage today?
Yeah, it's in the blood. It's in the blood, but we've suppressed it. We've suppressed our choice of life. And the question is why? Why are we committing what some thinkers call racial suicide? Why are we doing that? It's because we no longer have love of ourselves. We have no longer have love of our mutual man. We have no longer have that love. But it is time that we choose that the past chauvinisms of the past should no longer influence the decisions we make now. That we are past that, because there are greater things than the petty squabbles that divide us, and the greater things that exist are yet to come. But the choice has to be made whether we will live out the biological imperative, which is that to survive, to live out that European fundamentalist idea. That is entirely up to us in the end.
Yes, it is, Dean. And I'm afraid that the youth that you represent on this show are the people that are going to have to take up those battles. Because, yes, we can, the older generation can instill in you the need to fight, but yeah, you are, to a certain degree, going to have to be in the forefront of the battle to decide on the survival of your language, your heritage, your values.
Yes, but the only way that this can be done is by then removing ourselves from the Union of South Africa. That is the only way it can be done. When we pave our own road.
I agree. And so, in the last few minutes that we have left,
yes.
How are Front Nasionaal going to set about that?
All right. It is very important. Yes. It's very important to understand that, though it's something I've not touched on because I've only spoken about or have attempted to say on topic, which is that influences the youths in South Africa. When a person looks at the laws that have been put in place to remove land and take away private property from people of European ethnicity, a person must remember that this is typically a socialist idea where there's no private property, only communal property. And because of this, there has been a law put in place called the Land Reform Law, whereby the idea of taking away property from those that had withheld it before and giving it to those who do not know how to use it is the only way then to redistribute wealth, which is also a socialist concept. But at Front Nasionaal, we have turned this against them. We have put in claims of our own. Well, if you'd like, you can always research on for our listeners, perhaps if they might like. We have, in the 24th of April in 2014, we had put in a land claim on behalf of the people of European descent in South Africa, the European minority in South Africa, for the Republic of Oorigstad, which is now, if I can put it this way, in South Africa, that is very close to Potchefstroom. If anyone would like to perhaps read up about it. And also for the reinstitution of Stellaland. The Stellaland was a protectorate, a British protectorate, which existed quite some time ago. It existed prior to the Second Anglo-Boer War, or the Second Freedom War as it's known. And it had the same status as that of Hong Kong, of that as Singapore, of that of in Southern Africa, in Swaziland, in what was then known as Basutoland, which is now Lesotho, and also that in Botswana. But what is the difference between all of those places and Stellaland? All of those places now have their independence. Stellaland does not. So, us here at Front Nasionaal are now trying to reinstitute the Republic of Stellaland. The Republic of Stellaland is part of what is today known as the Northwestern Province, and its capital, which existed and is still in existence, is Vryburg, which means free mountain, yes.
Yes.
And it is still in existence today. And sorry, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Hello? Oh, sorry, sorry, fell away for a second. And currently we are trying to reinstitute these republics. You see, through the lands claim process, which is written in law and must be upheld by law because of the separation due to the separation of judiciary and state, which is also sometimes very vague, but nonetheless, these claims have been put in and currently are proceeding. But the thing that is really very worrying is the amount of people that are actually willing to join us and actually see that these claims are actually seen through. The people actually have hope that there are people who are actually standing up and actually are doing something. For some reason, people don't seem to want to believe there is hope as well, regardless of the progress which we are currently making.
Yeah. It's that same word that I keep using is hope. All
Yes.
these things that are turned against the whites in South Africa have denied them hope, have reduced them to hopelessness, and therefore they are not prepared to stand up and fight. And that is a very, very scary concept.
But I unfortunately it is so, and I hate to say this, but it is true. It will be the young people who will then see this ghost for what it is, this ghost of the new South Africa, this phantom as it is. And they will see its true face. And it's only when they see its true face, and that will be either in the way that their parents have been murdered or in the way that they've been hijacked. It's only at that stage that they will get mad. And when they get mad, then they will realize that what is happening in South Africa is not normal. It is not normal. But the problem is that most youths have grown up with it and they believe it's normal. But it's only when they are faced with the truth that they will want to change it. And we here at Front Nasionaal are paving the way. I'm sorry, say again?
I said on that note, we're going to have to close out today's show, but I would really, really like to have you back because we still have a lot of topics that we have not touched on. So thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for this vast education you have given us, and please, please come back on as soon as possible.
No, so thank you very much for your time, and sort of thank you very much to the listeners that have joined us here tonight, and it is much appreciated that they've taken out the time out of their busy schedule to come and listen to this radio station.
Thank you, Dean. God bless South Africa, God bless the USA, and God help the world that we live in today.
I can see myself with the golden sunrise, young girl. Open up your eyes, it's supposed to be your day. Now off you go, rise and bound, and you won't stop until you've found your own kind of way. And the wind will whip your tousled hair, the sun, the rain, the sweet despair, great tales of love and strife. And somewhere on your path to glory, you will write your story of a life. And all the towns that you walk through and all the people that you talk to,
Don't let those other guys make your family share data. Switch to T-Mobile now and get 4 lines with up to 6 gigs each of 4G LTE data. Just $30 a line. And no sharing. So ditch your data worries and switch to the Un-carrier today. Get to T-Mobile or call 1-800-T-Mobile.
Limited time offers plus taxes and fees. Capable device required. Coverage not available in some areas. See store for details.